The Highway 9 diner sat just outside Cedar Ridge, Montana, chrome gleaming under flickering neon, the smell of coffee and hash browns thick in the evening air. It was the kind of place where truckers, travelers, and locals crossed paths without trouble. Until the night a man in a tailored suit refused to pay his bill and humiliated a young waitress in front of everyone. Her name was Lily Carter, 23 years old, quiet, polite, and tired from double shifts. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just stood there holding the check while the man sneered and threatened to ruin her life. Then a figure rose from the corner booth, a biker in worn leather, graying beard, arms marked with ink and scars. His name was Cole Brennan. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply walked over, placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, and said something that made the entire diner go silent. "You don't know who she is, do you?" What followed wasn't a fight. It was something deeper, a reckoning built on loyalty, memory, and the kind of debt that can never be paid in cash. Because Lily wasn't just a waitress. She was the daughter of Sergeant Daniel Carter, a man who had saved 17 lives in a single night overseas, including Cole's. And when Cole made a call at 9:47 p.m., the road outside the diner began to rumble with the sound of engines. 43 motorcycles rolled in, each rider a veteran, each one there for the same reason: to honor a promise made long ago. This is the story of how one act of cruelty became a moment of justice, how silence became thunder, and how the memory of a fallen soldier came roaring back to life on 2 wheels, and a vow that would never be broken. Before I continue with all 9 chapters, please let me know if this synopsis captures the tone and style you're looking for, or if you'd like any adjustments. The Highway 9 diner had been standing on the edge of Cedar Ridge, Montana, for 42 years. Its neon sign buzzed and flickered in the fading light, casting a red glow across the gravel parking lot. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee, grease from the griddle, and the faint sweetness of apple pie cooling on the counter. The booths were cracked vinyl, the floor was checkered linoleum, and the jukebox in the corner hadn't worked since 2003. But people came anyway. Truckers, travelers, locals who had nowhere else to go. It was a Tuesday evening in late September. The sun was sinking behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and bruised purple. Inside, the diner was half full. A trucker sat at the counter, nursing his 3rd cup of coffee. A couple shared a plate of fries in the corner booth. An older woman read a newspaper by the window, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. Behind the counter, Lily Carter moved with quiet efficiency. She was 23, slender, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that had seen too many double shifts. Her uniform was faded, the name tag crooked, but she smiled when she refilled cups and asked if anyone needed anything else. She didn't complain. She never did. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, and if you've ever witnessed something unforgettable at a roadside diner. At the far end of the diner, near the back exit, sat a man who didn't belong. His suit was tailored, charcoal gray with a silk tie. His watch gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the kind that cost more than most people made in a year. His hair was slicked back, his jaw sharp, his expression carved from stone and arrogance. His name was Raymond Holt, and he owned 3 car dealerships across the state. He sat alone, his phone face down on the table, his plate of steak and mashed potatoes mostly untouched. When Lily approached with the check, she placed it gently beside his water glass. "Whenever you're ready, sir," she said softly, her voice polite, practiced. Raymond didn't look up. He picked up the check, glanced at it, then tossed it back onto the table. "I'm not paying this," he said flatly. Lily blinked. "I'm sorry. You heard me." He leaned back in the booth, crossing his arms. The steak was overcooked. The service was slow. "I'm not paying for mediocrity." Lily's hands tightened around her notepad. "Sir, I can talk to the cook if there was a problem." "I don't care what you do," Raymond interrupted. I'm not paying, and if you try to make me, I'll make sure this place gets a review online that'll put you out of business by next week." The diner had gone quiet. The trucker at the counter turned his head. The couple in the corner booth stopped eating. Even the older woman by the window lowered her newspaper. Lily stood frozen, her cheeks flushing red. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She just held the check, her hands trembling slightly, and said nothing. Raymond smirked. "That's what I thought." Then, from the corner booth near the jukebox, a figure rose. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair pulled back in a short ponytail. His leather jacket was scuffed and worn, the patches on the sleeves faded from years on the road. His arms were marked with tattoos, military ink, dates, names, symbols that told stories only other veterans would understand. His beard was thick and streaked with silver. His eyes were sharp, cold, and filled with something that looked like quiet rage. His name was Cole Brennan, 51 years old, former Marine, Iraq war veteran, member of the Iron Riders, a brotherhood of bikers who had all served, all bled, and all carried the weight of promises they refused to break. Cole walked slowly across the diner, his boots heavy on the linoleum. He stopped beside Lily, placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle, protective, and looked directly at Raymond. "You don't know who she is, do you?" Cole said quietly. Raymond looked up, his smirk fading into irritation. "Excuse me?" Cole didn't move. His voice was calm, steady, but there was steel beneath it. "Her name is Lily Carter. She's the daughter of Sergeant Daniel Carter, United States Army, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. He saved 17 lives in a single night in Fallujah. One of them was mine." The diner was silent. Raymond's face paled slightly, but he tried to hold his composure. "I don't care who her father was." "You should," Cole interrupted. His hand remained on Lily's shoulder. "Because every man and woman who rode with him, who served beside him, who owes their life to him, we made a promise that if anything ever happened to him, we'd look after his family. And right now, you're trying to humiliate his daughter." Raymond's jaw tightened. He glanced around the diner, suddenly aware that every eye was on him. "I'm not paying for bad service," he said, his voice losing its edge. Cole leaned down slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Raymond could hear. "Then you're gonna regret what happens next." He straightened, pulled out his phone and dialed. The line rang once. Then a voice answered. "Jackson," Cole said. "It's time." He hung up, slipped the phone back into his jacket, and stood there, arms crossed, waiting. Outside in the distance, a low rumble began to build. Faint at first, then louder, closer, the sound of engines. Dozens of them. Raymond Holt's face went white. Cole Brennan didn't sit back down. He stood beside Lily, his hand still resting lightly on her shoulder, his eyes locked on Raymond Holt. The diner remained frozen in silence. The only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter and the distant rumble growing louder outside. Lily looked up at Cole, confusion and something close to fear flickering across her face. "Mr. Brennan, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Cole said quietly, his voice steady. "Your father would have done the same for me." Raymond shifted in his seat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but threatening me isn't going to—" "I'm not threatening you," Cole interrupted, his tone flat. "I'm just letting you know what's coming." The rumble outside grew louder, closer. The trucker at the counter stood up, walked to the window, and peered out into the parking lot. His eyes widened. "Holy hell," he muttered. One by one, the others in the diner turned to look. The couple in the corner booth, the older woman by the window, even the cook, a grizzled man in his 60s, stepped out from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. Through the glass, the first motorcycle rolled into view, then another, then 10 more, 20, 30, 43 in total, their headlights cutting through the twilight, their engines roaring in perfect unison. They parked in rows, side by side, forming a wall of chrome and leather that stretched across the entire parking lot. The riders dismounted. They wore leather jackets, bandanas, patches that bore the symbols of military units, branches, and wars. Some were young, some were old, some walked with limps. Others had scars that ran deep. But every single one of them moved with purpose, with discipline, with the kind of silent understanding that came from shared combat and unspoken oaths. They lined up outside the diner, standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces hard, their eyes fixed on the windows. Raymond's hand shook as he reached for his water glass. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. Cole glanced down at him. "This is the Iron Riders. Every man out there is a veteran. Every one of them served with Daniel Carter, or knew someone who did, or owes their life to someone he saved." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "And every one of them made the same promise I did." The door to the diner swung open. A man stepped inside, tall, broad, with a shaved head and a thick beard. His jacket bore the patch of the 101st Airborne. His name was Jackson Hayes, and he'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to work as a firefighter in Billings. He walked straight to Cole, gave him a brief nod, then turned to face Raymond. "This the guy?" Jackson asked, his voice low and rough. Cole nodded. "Yeah?" Jackson crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "You threatening Lily Carter?" Raymond opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I wasn't threatening anyone, I just—" "You refused to pay your bill," Jackson said. "You insulted her. You told her you'd destroy this place. That sound about right?" Raymond's face flushed. "I have the right to complain about bad service. You have the right to be respectful," Jackson said, his voice hardening. "And you failed." Another rider stepped inside, then another. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Their presence alone was enough. The diner filled with the scent of leather and gasoline, the weight of decades of service and sacrifice. Lily stood frozen, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. "I don't understand," she whispered to Cole. "Why are they here?" Cole turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Because your father saved my life, and not just mine. 17 of us walked away from a firefight we shouldn't have survived because of him. He didn't make it out, but we did, and we swore we'd never forget." His voice dropped, thick with emotion. "We swore we'd look after you." Tears welled in Lily's eyes. She hadn't known. Her father had died when she was 11. She remembered the funeral, the folded flag, the soldiers who had stood at attention. But she'd never known how many lives he'd saved, how many people still carried his memory. "He never told me," she whispered. "He wouldn't have," Cole said. "That's who he was." Raymond tried to stand, but Jackson stepped forward, blocking his path. "Sit down," Jackson said quietly. Raymond sat. Cole pulled out his phone again, scrolled through his contacts, and pressed another number. This time, the call was answered immediately. "Sheriff Dawson," a voice said on the other end. "Tom, it's Cole Brennan. I'm at the Highway 9 diner. We've got a situation. Man here refused to pay, threatened the staff, and made a scene. Thought you'd want to know." There was a pause. Then the sheriff's voice came back, calm but firm. "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Cole hung up, slipped the phone back into his jacket, and looked down at Raymond. "You've got 2 choices. You can pay your bill, apologize to Lily and walk out of here, or you can wait for the sheriff and explain yourself to him." Raymond's hands were trembling now. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a handful of bills, and threw them onto the table. "Fine, here, take it." Cole didn't move. "And the apology." Raymond's jaw clenched. He looked up at Lily, who stood watching him with quiet dignity. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "Louder," Jackson said. Raymond's face burned red. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice shaking. Lily nodded slowly. "Apology accepted," she said softly. Cole stepped aside. "You can go." Raymond stood, grabbed his jacket, and hurried toward the door. As he passed through the line of riders outside, not one of them moved. They just watched him, silent and unblinking, until he got into his car and drove away, his taillights disappearing into the night. Inside the diner, the tension broke. The riders began to file in, filling the booths and the counter, ordering coffee and pie, talking quietly among themselves. Lily stood at the center of it all, overwhelmed, her eyes glistening with tears. Cole placed a hand on her shoulder again. "You're not alone, kid," he said gently. "You never were." Outside, the sound of another engine rumbled in the distance. Sheriff Dawson was on his way. Sheriff Tom Dawson pulled up to the Highway 9 diner 10 minutes later, his patrol car rolling slowly into the packed parking lot. He was in his mid-50s, grey at the temples, with a weathered face that had seen its share of trouble. He'd served in the army before becoming a cop, and he knew most of the riders gathered outside by name. When he stepped out of his car, Jackson Hayes met him at the door. "Jackson," Dawson said, nodding. Cole called. "What's going on?" Rich Guy tried to stiff Lily Carter on his bill, humiliated her in front of everyone. Cole stepped in. Guy paid up and left. Dawson glanced through the window, saw Lily standing behind the counter, her eyes red, but her posture steady. He nodded slowly. "She okay?" "She will be," Jackson said. "We made sure of it." Dawson looked out at the rows of motorcycles, then back at Jackson. "You boys planning to stay long?" Jackson shrugged. "Long as it takes." Dawson sighed, but there was a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Just keep it peaceful, all right?" "Always do," Jackson replied. The sheriff walked inside, nodded to a few of the riders he recognized, then made his way to the counter where Lily stood. "You all right, Miss Carter?" he asked gently. Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yes, sir. Thank you." Dawson glanced at Cole, who stood nearby. "You make the call?" "I did," Cole said. "Didn't think it was right, what he was doing." Dawson studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You did the right thing." He turned back to Lily. "If that man comes back and gives you trouble, you call me directly. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Lily said softly. Dawson tipped his hat, said goodbye to a few of the riders, and walked back out to his car. As he drove away, the diner settled into a new kind of rhythm. The riders ordered food, shared stories, laughed quietly. Lily moved between the tables, refilling coffee, bringing plates of pie, still processing everything that had happened. Cole sat in his original booth, watching her. Jackson slid into the seat across from him, setting down a cup of black coffee. "She didn't know, did she?" Jackson asked quietly. Cole shook his head. "No. Carter never told her." Jackson took a sip of his coffee. That's how he was. Never wanted credit. Just did what needed to be done. "Yeah," Cole said, his voice distant. "That's how he was. Drop a comment below, telling me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Let's see how far this story reaches." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of memory settling between them. Then Jackson spoke again. "You ever tell her what happened that night?" Cole shook his head. "Not yet." "Maybe you should," Jackson said. "She deserves to know." Cole looked up, his jaw tight. "Maybe." Later that night, after most of the riders had left and only a few remained, Cole approached Lily as she wiped down the counter. "You got a minute?" he asked. Lily looked up, surprised. "Of course." Cole gestured to a booth near the window. They sat across from each other, the diner quiet now, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. "I want to tell you about your father," Cole said slowly, "if you're ready to hear it." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I'm ready." Cole took a breath, his hands folded on the table. It was October 2007, Fallujah. We were on patrol, clearing buildings. My unit got ambushed, pinned down in a house with no way out. 4 of us wounded, ammunition running low. We thought we were done. He paused, his voice thick. Then your father showed up. He wasn't even supposed to be there. He heard the call on the radio and came running. He and 3 others fought their way in, pulled us out one by one, carried the wounded on their backs. He took 2 rounds doing it, kept going anyway. Lily's hand covered her mouth. "He never told me," she whispered. "He wouldn't," Cole said. "But 17 of us made it out because of him, and when he didn't make it home, we all felt it. Every single one of us." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a worn photograph, and slid it across the table. It was a group shot. Soldiers standing together, dirty, exhausted but alive. Daniel Carter stood in the center, grinning, his arm around Cole's shoulder. "We made a promise that night," Cole said, "that if anything ever happened to him, we'd look after his family. That's why we're here. That's why we'll always be here." Lily stared at the photograph, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." Cole nodded, his own eyes damp. "He was a good man. The best I ever knew." Outside, the last of the motorcycles rumbled to life and pulled away into the night, their taillights disappearing down the highway. But the promise remained. Unbroken, unshakable, eternal. The next morning, the Highway 9 diner opened as it always did, at 6 a.m., with the first pot of coffee brewing and the smell of bacon sizzling on the griddle. Lily arrived early, her eyes still red from the night before, but there was something different about her now. A quiet strength, a sense of being seen, of being protected, that she hadn't felt in years. Cole Brennan was already there, sitting in the same corner booth, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. When Lily walked in, he nodded. She nodded back, a small smile tugging at her lips. "You didn't have to come back so early," she said as she tied her apron. "Wanted to make sure you were all right," Cole replied simply. Lily poured herself a cup of coffee and slid into the booth across from him. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "For last night, for everything." Cole shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. I owed your father. We all did." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the diner slowly filling with the usual morning crowd, truckers, construction workers, retirees nursing their first cups of the day. Then the door swung open, and Raymond Holt walked in. The diner went quiet, every head turned. Lily froze, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. Cole's eyes narrowed, but he didn't move. Raymond looked different. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his hair disheveled. He walked slowly to the counter, his hands shaking slightly, and stood there for a long moment before speaking. "I need to talk to Lily," he said, his voice hoarse. The cook, a man named Frank, who'd been working at the diner for 30 years, stepped forward. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said firmly. "Please," Raymond said, his voice breaking. "I need to apologize. Properly." Cole stood, his presence filling the room. "You said your piece last night," he said coldly. "I know," Raymond said, turning to face him. "But I didn't mean it, not really. I was angry. At myself. At everything. And I took it out on her." He looked at Lily, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "I spent all night thinking about what I did. About what kind of man I've become, and I'm ashamed." Lily set her coffee down slowly, her expression unreadable. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Raymond swallowed hard. "Because I looked you up. After I left, I found articles about your father, about what he did, who he was," his voice cracked, "and I realized I disrespected the daughter of a hero. A man who gave his life so others could live. And I can't undo that, but I can try to make it right." He reached into his jacket, pulled out an envelope and placed it on the counter. "There's $5,000 in there, for you. Not as payment, not as charity, as an apology, for being the kind of man who forgets that everyone has a story. Everyone deserves respect." Lily stared at the envelope, then back at Raymond. "I don't want your money," she said quietly. Raymond nodded slowly. "I understand, but please, take it anyway. Donate it, save it, do whatever you want with it. I need to know I tried." Cole stepped forward, his eyes hard. "You think money fixes what you did?" "No," Raymond said, his voice barely a whisper. "But it's all I have." Lily looked at Cole, then back at Raymond. She took a deep breath, reached for the envelope and opened it. Inside were crisp bills, neatly stacked. She closed it, held it for a moment, then handed it back to Raymond. "I don't need your money," she said firmly. "But if you really want to make things right, there's something you can do." Raymond looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Anything." Lily glanced at Cole, then back at Raymond. There's a veterans shelter 2 towns over. They're always short on funds. Donate the money there, in my father's name." Raymond's face crumpled. He nodded, clutching the envelope to his chest. "I will, I promise." Lily held his gaze. "And one more thing." "Anything," Raymond repeated. "Be better," Lily said quietly. "Not just today. Every day." Raymond nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I swear." He turned and walked out, the door swinging shut behind him. The diner remained silent for a long moment. Then Frank, the cook, started clapping. Slowly, the others joined in, the truckers, the construction workers, the retirees. A low, steady applause that filled the room. Lily stood there, overwhelmed, her eyes glistening. Cole walked over, placed a hand on her shoulder, and leaned in close. "Your father would be proud," he said softly. Lily smiled through her tears. "I hope so." Outside, the sun climbed higher into the Montana sky, casting golden light across the highway. And somewhere in the distance, the rumble of motorcycles echoed like a promise that would never fade. 3 days later, Cole Brennan stood in the parking lot of the Veterans Hope Shelter, watching as Raymond Holt's car pulled up to the front entrance. Raymond stepped out, holding the same envelope, now sealed and addressed. He walked inside without looking back. Cole had followed him, not to confront him, but to make sure he kept his word. Trust, in Cole's world, was earned through action, not promises. Inside the shelter, a woman in her early 50s greeted Raymond at the front desk. Her name was Margaret Keene, a former Army nurse who had dedicated her life to helping veterans who had fallen through the cracks. She looked at Raymond with polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. Raymond placed the envelope on the desk. "I'd like to make a donation, $5,000, in the name of Sergeant Daniel Carter." Margaret's eyes widened. She picked up the envelope, opened it, and stared at the bills inside. "This is incredibly generous," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "May I ask what prompted this?" Raymond hesitated, then met her gaze. "I made a mistake. Hurt someone I shouldn't have. This is my way of trying to make it right." Margaret studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Sergeant Carter was a hero. This will help a lot of people." "Good," Raymond said quietly. "That's all I wanted." He turned to leave, but Margaret called after him. "Mr. Holt?" He stopped, glanced back. "Thank you," she said, "for choosing to be better." Raymond nodded, his throat tight, and walked out. Cole was waiting by his motorcycle, arms crossed. When Raymond saw him, he froze. "I kept my word," Raymond said, his voice defensive. "I know," Cole said. "I watched." Raymond relaxed slightly. "So what now?" Cole walked closer, his expression unreadable. "Now you keep doing what you said you'd do. Be better, not just today, every day." Raymond nodded. "I will." Cole extended his hand. Raymond stared at it for a moment, then took it. They shook once, firmly, then let go. "If you ever forget," Cole said quietly, "I'll remind you." Raymond swallowed hard. "I won't forget." Cole watched him drive away, then mounted his bike and headed back towards Cedar Ridge. The road stretched out before him, endless and open, the wind cutting through his jacket as the engine roared beneath him. That evening, the Iron Riders gathered at a bar on the outskirts of town. It was a place they'd been meeting for years, a low-lit dive with pool tables, a jukebox that only played classic rock, and a bartender named Eddie, who had served in Vietnam and never asked questions. Cole walked in, and the room erupted in greetings. Jackson Hayes clapped him on the back. A woman named Reese, who had served as a medic in Iraq, handed him a beer. They settled into their usual corner, chairs pulled close, voices low. "Heard about what happened at the diner," Reese said, her eyes sharp. "You handled it well." Cole shrugged. "Just did what needed to be done." "That's what we all do," Jackson said. "But not everyone remembers why." He raised his beer. "To Daniel Carter, and to the promise we made." The others raised their glasses. "To Carter," they said in unison. They drank in silence, the weight of memory settling over them like a shroud. Then Jackson spoke again. "You think Lily's going to be all right?" Cole nodded. "Yeah, she's stronger than she knows." "Good," Jackson said, "because Carter would have wanted that." They spent the rest of the night sharing stories about Carter, about the war, about the brothers and sisters they'd lost along the way. It was how they honored the dead, not with monuments or speeches, but with memory, with presence, with the unbreakable bond that came from having survived something no one else could understand. As the night wore on, Cole stepped outside for air. He stood in the parking lot, staring up at the stars, his breath misting in the cold mountain air. He thought about Lily, about the photograph he'd given her, about the look in her eyes when she'd finally understood who her father had been. "You did good, Carter," Cole said quietly to the night. "Your kid's going to be just fine." Behind him the door opened, and Jackson stepped out. "You all right?" he asked. Cole nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." Jackson stood beside him, silent for a moment. "We're not done yet, you know," he said finally. "The promise doesn't end here." "I know," Cole said. "It never does." They stood together in the cold, two men bound by war, by loss, by the kind of loyalty that couldn't be broken, and somewhere in the distance the sound of engines rumbled like thunder, a reminder that the road went on, and so did they. 2 weeks passed. Life at the Highway 9 diner returned to its usual rhythm. Coffee poured, orders shouted, the jukebox humming in the corner. But something had shifted. Lily Carter carried herself differently now. She smiled more, spoke with more confidence, and when difficult customers came through, she handled them with a quiet grace that came from knowing she wasn't alone. Cole still came by most mornings, always ordering the same thing: black coffee, scrambled eggs, wheat toast. He didn't say much, but his presence was a constant, a reminder that the promise remained. One Saturday afternoon, a package arrived at the diner addressed to Lily. She opened it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was a wooden box, polished and engraved with the words, "In honor of Sergeant Daniel Carter, a hero remembered." Lily opened the box. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of her father in uniform, standing with his unit, smiling in front of tanks and Humvees. Letters from soldiers he'd served with, each one telling a story of how he'd saved a life, offered encouragement, or simply been there when it mattered most. There was also a medal, a Purple Heart, presented posthumously. Lily had seen the flag they'd given her mother at the funeral, but she'd never known about this. She sat in the booth, tears streaming down her face, reading letter after letter. Each one was a piece of her father she'd never known, a glimpse into the man he'd been when he wasn't home. Cole walked in, saw her crying, and immediately crossed the diner. "What happened?" he asked, concern in his voice. Lily looked up, holding the box. "This came today, from the Iron Riders." Cole's expression softened. "We wanted you to have it. Thought it was time you knew the whole story." Lily set the box down, stood and hugged him tightly. Cole stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, wrapping his arms around her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "You don't have to thank me," Cole said quietly. "This is what family does. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. It helps more than you know." That evening, Lily invited Cole to her small apartment above the diner. It was modest. A single bedroom, a kitchenette, a couch that had seen better days, but it was hers, and she'd made it warm with photos, books, and plants that lined the windowsill. They sat at the small kitchen table, coffee mugs in hand, the wooden box between them. Lily pulled out each photograph, each letter, asking questions, listening as Cole filled in the gaps. "He talked about you all the time," Cole said. "Always carried a picture of you in his pocket. Used to show it to anyone who'd listen." Lily smiled through her tears. "I wish I'd known him better. I was so young when he left." "He knew that," Cole said. "It tore him up. But he also knew he was doing something that mattered. And he wanted you to grow up in a world that was safer because of it." Lily nodded, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "Do you think he'd be proud of me?" she asked quietly. Cole looked at her, his eyes steady. I know he would. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of memory settling between them. Then Lily spoke again. I want to do something, to honor him, to make sure people remember. Cole leaned forward. What did you have in mind? Lily pulled out one of the letters, read it again, then looked up. I want to start a scholarship for kids whose parents served and didn't make it home, so they can go to college, get a good job, have a future. Cole's face broke into a rare smile. That's a hell of an idea. I don't have much money, Lily said quickly, but maybe if I save, if I ask for donations. You won't have to, Cole interrupted. The Iron Riders will help. So will the VA. So will everyone who knew your father. Lily's eyes widened. You'd do that? Of course we would, Cole said. This is exactly the kind of thing Carter would have wanted. Over the next few weeks, the plan took shape. Cole spread the word among the riders. Jackson contacted local veterans organizations. Reese reached out to schools and community centers. Donations started coming in. $50 here, $100 there, sometimes more. By the end of the month, they had enough to fund the first scholarship. Lily named it the Sergeant Daniel Carter Memorial Scholarship, and the first recipient was a 17-year-old girl from Billings, whose father had been killed in Afghanistan. The presentation was held at the Veterans Hope Shelter. Margaret Keane hosted, and over 200 people showed up. Veterans, families, community members. Lily stood at the front of the room holding the plaque, her voice shaking as she spoke. My father gave his life so others could live, she said. I never got to thank him for that, but I can honor him by helping others the way he helped so many. This scholarship is for every child who lost a parent in service. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. The room erupted in applause. Cole stood in the back, arms crossed, a proud smile on his face. Jackson leaned over and whispered, Carter would have loved this. Yeah, Cole said quietly. He would have. After the ceremony, Lily found Cole outside, sitting on his motorcycle, staring up at the stars. She walked over, wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. Thank you, she said, for making this happen. Cole shook his head. You made it happen. I just helped clear the road. Lily smiled. My father was lucky to have friends like you. No, Cole said, his voice thick. We were lucky to have him. They stood together in the cold Montana night. The stars bright overhead, the rumble of distant engines a reminder that the promise endured, and would endure, always. 3 months after the scholarship was established, Lily received a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, postmarked from Washington, D.C., and with the official seal of the Department of Defense embossed on the envelope. She opened it carefully, her hands trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed and signed by a colonel she'd never heard of. The words blurred as she read them, tears filling her eyes. Dear Miss Carter, it has come to our attention that you have established a scholarship in honor of your father, Sergeant Daniel Carter, United States Army. We wanted to take this opportunity to formally recognize his service and sacrifice. Sergeant Carter was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for his actions on the night of October 14, 2007, in Fallujah, Iraq. His bravery and selflessness saved 17 lives and exemplified the highest ideals of military service. We regret that this recognition comes so late, but we hope it brings some measure of comfort to know that his legacy endures, not only in the lives he saved, but in the scholarship you have created in his name. With deepest respect, Colonel Michael Hartman, United States Army. Lily sat down, clutching the letter to her chest, sobbing. She had known her father was a hero, but seeing it written officially, seeing the government acknowledge what he'd done, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She called Cole immediately. They gave him the Silver Star, she said, her voice breaking. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Cole's voice, thick with emotion. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He arrived with Jackson, Reese, and a half-dozen other riders. They crowded into the diner, gathering around Lily, reading the letter, their faces somber and proud. "This is what he deserved," Jackson said quietly. "Finally." Reese placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Your father was one of the best. This just makes it official." Cole stood off to the side, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. Lily walked over to him. "You okay?" she asked. Cole nodded slowly. "Yeah, just thinking about that night, about how close we came to not making it." "But you did," Lily said softly. "Because of him." Cole looked at her, his eyes glistening. "Yeah, because of him." That evening, the Iron Riders held a memorial ride. They gathered at the diner. 47 motorcycles lined up in formation, engines rumbling in unison. Lily stood at the front, holding a framed copy of the letter, tears streaming down her face. Cole handed her a helmet. "You're riding with me," he said. Lily blinked. "I've never been on a motorcycle." "Today's a good day to start," Cole said with a faint smile. She climbed on behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. The other riders revved their engines, the sound echoing through the parking lot like thunder. And then they were moving, rolling out onto the highway, the wind roaring past, the mountains rising on either side. They rode for hours, through winding roads and open plains, past small towns and endless sky. They stopped at an overlook, a place where the land fell away and you could see for miles. Cole cut the engine, and the other riders did the same. The silence was profound. Jackson stepped forward, holding a flag, the same one that had been draped over Daniel Carter's casket. He unfolded it carefully, holding it high as the wind caught it, the stars and stripes snapping in the breeze. "To Sergeant Daniel Carter," Jackson said, his voice strong. "A brother, a hero, a man who gave everything so we could stand here today." The riders saluted. Lily stood beside Cole, her hand over her heart, tears streaming down her face. And for a moment, it felt like her father was there with them, standing in the wind, smiling at the family he'd left behind. They rode back as the sun set, the sky painted in shades of orange and gold. When they reached the diner, Lily climbed off the bike, her legs shaky, her heart full. "Thank you," she said to Cole, "for everything." Cole pulled her into a hug. "You're family, kid. Always will be." The riders dispersed, engines fading into the distance, leaving only the quiet hum of the diner and the stars overhead. Lily stood in the parking lot, looking up at the sky, and whispered, "I love you, Dad." Somewhere, she knew, he heard her. 6 months later, the Highway 9 diner was busier than ever. Word had spread about Lily and the scholarship, and people came from all over to support her. Truckers left bigger tips. Travelers bought extra pie. Veterans stopped by just to shake her hand and share stories about her father. Lily had saved enough to hire another waitress, a young woman named Emma, who had recently moved to Cedar Ridge with her 2 kids. Emma was grateful for the job, and Lily was grateful for the help. The diner hummed with new life. Cole still came by most mornings, but now he wasn't alone. Jackson, Reese, and others from the Iron Riders made the diner their regular stop. It became a gathering place, a hub for veterans and their families, a spot where stories were shared and promises were kept. One morning, a young man walked in. He was in his early 20s, tall and lean, with short cropped hair and a nervous energy about him. He wore a faded army t-shirt and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He approached the counter, where Lily was pouring coffee. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "Are you Lily Carter?" Lily looked up, surprised. "Yes. Can I help you?" The young man's eyes filled with tears. "My name is Marcus Rivera. I'm here because of your father." Lily set down the coffee pot. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a shaky breath. "My dad was in Fallujah, same night as Sergeant Carter. He was one of the 17 your father saved." Lily's heart stopped. "Your father? He made it home?" Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yeah, he made it home. And he spent the rest of his life telling me about the man who saved him, about Sergeant Carter, about how brave he was, how selfless." He reached into his backpack, pulled out a worn photograph, and placed it on the counter. It was the same group shot Cole had shown her, soldiers standing together, dirty, exhausted, alive. Marcus's father stood on the far right, grinning. "My dad passed away 2 months ago," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "Cancer. But before he died, he made me promise to find you, to tell you thank you, because without your father I wouldn't exist." Lily covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She walked around the counter and pulled Marcus into a hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for coming." Cole, who had been watching from his booth, stood and walked over. He recognized Marcus's father in the photograph immediately. "Rivera," he said quietly. "Your dad was a hell of a soldier." Marcus turned, his eyes wide. "You knew him?" "I was there that night," Cole said. "Your dad carried 2 of us out. Wouldn't leave until everyone was safe." Marcus broke down completely. Cole placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and strong. "He'd be proud of you," Cole said. "Coming here, keeping your promise." They spent the next hour talking, sharing stories, connecting the threads of a night that had changed all their lives. Other riders arrived, recognized the photograph and joined in. The diner filled with laughter and tears, with memory and gratitude. Before Marcus left, Lily gave him a copy of the scholarship information. "If you ever need help," she said, "this is here for you." Marcus nodded, clutching the paper. "Thank you for everything." He walked out into the Montana sunshine, climbed into his car, and drove away. But the connection remained, another thread woven into the tapestry of a promise that stretched across years and miles and lives. Lily stood in the doorway watching him go, her heart full. Cole stood beside her. "You're changing lives," he said quietly. "No," Lily said, smiling through her tears. "My father did. I'm just making sure people remember." Cole nodded. "That's enough." And it was. 2 years later, the Sergeant Daniel Carter Memorial Scholarship had grown beyond anything Lily could have imagined. With support from the Iron Riders, local businesses, and veterans organizations across the state, they had funded scholarships for 32 students, children of fallen soldiers, each one carrying the legacy of service and sacrifice. The Highway 9 diner had become a landmark. Articles were written about it. News crews came to interview Lily. Veterans from across the country stopped by to pay their respects, to share their stories, to be part of something bigger than themselves. But for Lily, the most meaningful moments were the quiet ones. The mornings when Cole walked in and sat in his usual booth, the evenings when riders gathered, sharing coffee and memories, the letters that arrived from scholarship recipients telling her how the money had changed their lives. One spring morning, Lily stood outside the diner watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. She held a photograph in her hands, the one Cole had given her, the one with her father smiling, his arm around Cole's shoulder. "I hope I'm making you proud, Dad," she whispered. Behind her, the sound of an engine rumbled. She turned to see Cole pulling into the parking lot, his motorcycle gleaming in the morning light. He cut the engine, climbed off, and walked over. "You okay?" he asked. Lily nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yeah, just thinking." Cole stood beside her, looking out at the mountains. "He's proud," he said quietly. "I know he is." Lily smiled. "How do you know?" Cole tapped his chest. "Because I feel it. Right here. Every day." They stood in comfortable silence, the wind rustling through the trees, the world waking up around them. Then Lily spoke again. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't been there that night? At the diner?" Cole shook his head. "I don't, because I was there. That's all that matters." "But why?" Lily asked. "Why do you keep doing this? Helping me, looking out for me?" Cole looked at her, his eyes steady. "Because your father didn't just save my life. He gave me a reason to keep living, and the best way I can honor that is by making sure you're okay." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "You've done so much more than that." "Good," Cole said with a faint smile. "Then I'm doing it right." That evening, the Iron Riders held their annual memorial ride. Over 100 motorcycles gathered at the diner, engines rumbling, flags flying. Lily rode with Cole, as she always did now, her arms wrapped around his waist, the wind roaring past. They rode to the overlook, the place where they had first honored her father. The sun was setting, the sky ablaze with color. The riders dismounted, standing in a circle, their heads bowed. Jackson stepped forward, holding the flag. "To all those who served," he said, his voice strong, "to all those who gave everything, we remember, we honor, we keep the promise." The riders saluted. Lily stood beside Cole, her hand over her heart, tears streaming down her face. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she felt it, a presence, warm and strong, standing beside her. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, carrying her words away. And in that moment she knew, the promise wasn't just kept. It was alive, unbreakable, eternal. As they rode back to the diner, the stars began to emerge, bright against the darkening sky. Lily looked up, smiling through her tears. Somewhere she knew her father was smiling back. And the road went on. 5 years after that first night at the Highway 9 diner, Lily Carter stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., and accepting a national award for her work with the scholarship program. She wore a simple black dress, her father's silver star pinned to her chest, her voice steady as she spoke to a room full of politicians, veterans, and donors. "My father taught me that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform," she said. "It continues in the promises we keep, the lives we touch, and the legacies we build. This scholarship is his legacy, and it will endure as long as there are people willing to remember." The room erupted in applause. Cole sat in the front row, dressed in a suit for the first time in years, his eyes damp with pride. Beside him sat Jackson, Reese, and dozens of other riders who had traveled across the country to be there. After the ceremony, they gathered outside, the Washington Monument towering in the distance. Lily hugged each of them, thanking them for everything they'd done. "We're proud of you, kid," Jackson said, his voice thick. "Couldn't have done it without you," Lily replied. Cole stepped forward, pulled her into a hug, and whispered, "Your father is smiling right now. I guarantee it." Lily smiled through her tears. "I hope so." As the sun set over the Capitol, the Iron Riders mounted their motorcycles and prepared to ride home. Lily climbed on behind Cole, the familiar weight of the helmet settling on her head, the rumble of the engine vibrating through her chest. They rode through the city, past monuments and memorials, past the graves of heroes who had given everything. And as they left D.C. behind, heading west toward Montana, Lily looked up at the sky, at the stars beginning to emerge, and felt a peace she'd never known before. The promise was kept, the legacy endured. And the road went on, stretching endlessly into the night, carried forward by the roar of engines and the unbreakable bond of those who refused to forget. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. The best way to honor those who serve is to remember always.